If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
Let's wrap the show up here with something real quick that is important because it does kind of involve the Knicks, at least tangentially. The NBA has launched an investigation against the Dallas Mavericks after the team elected not to play many of its key players down the stretch for the regular season. The Mavs were still in playing contention when the team decided to pull the plug on the season, benching Kyrie Irving and 5 other players in a crucial game against the Chicago Bulls. Luka Doncic, who was not happy with the decision, who demanded to play in the game, played just the first quarter before being pulled. The NBA spokesman Mike Bass said the NBA commenced an investigation into the facts and circumstances surrounding the Dallas Mavericks roster decision and game conduct with respect to last night's Bulls-Mavericks game, including the motivations behind those actions. So prior to the game, Jason Kidd said this: "Its decisions sometimes are hard in this business. We're trying to build a championship team. With this decision, this is maybe a step back, but hopefully it leads to going forward." He also mentioned that this was a decision that was made by management, not the coaching staff. So really interesting thing that Jason Kidd would admit, essentially, that they were willing to take a quote-unquote step back to go forward by not playing their players in the most important game of the season for them. The Mavs entered that game tied with the Bulls for the 10th best lottery odds in this year's draft. That is important because the Mavs owe the Knicks a top 10 protected lottery pick from the Kristaps Porzingis trade. So if this pick lands in the top 10, then they get to keep the pick. But if it lands outside the top 10, they would not have kept the pick. We talked about this a little bit last week, and now it's become one of the biggest stories in the NBA as we head into the playoffs. Still, this is still a hot topic. How do you think the Mavs? Well, A, how do you think the NBA should handle this Mavs situation regarding this tanking? And B, are you a proponent, like some have been, that the Knicks should get this lottery pick because the Mavs tanked away the season, tanked the chance at possibly finishing 11th in the NBA's worst records?
Yeah, I don't think the Knicks should get the pick. I don't think they will get the pick. So I'll say that because for numerous reasons. But I will say this: what happened in Dallas was a disgrace. It was a black eye on the NBA. It really sets a bad precedent. Again, the NBA has gone to great lengths to convince fans that the regular season matters. Because if the regular season doesn't matter, that's going to cost the NBA ticket sales. It's going to cost the NBA ratings points. It's really going to hurt business. It's going to hurt the bottom line if fans think like the end. We've seen what happened with the NCAA. The tournament's awesome, but it basically renders the regular season meaningless. Fans, unless you go to the school or a real diehard fan of, a Big Ten team, it's hard to get invested in the action because it basically doesn't matter. That's what the NBA has really done. It's gone out of its way to prevent from happening. We've seen that just recently with you have to play at least 65 regular season games to cut down on the back-to-backs, etc. And we've seen it a few years ago when the Adam Silver and the league introduced the play-in tournament. And also evened out the lottery odds. So if you finish with the worst record, you still have the same odds of getting the number 1 overall pick as the team that finishes with the 3rd worst record, 4th worst record. So this is a problem on a grand scale for the NBA. People have said, "Oh, teams have been tanking forever. This is no different than that." This is an unprecedented event. Again, as EJ mentioned, as of Friday morning, 72 hours left in the regular season, the Cavs were essentially tied
the
Mavs. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
The Mavs were essentially tied with the Thunder for that final 10th playing spot. What they had to do was win 2 games against the Bulls team, which was sitting out their 2 best players. And the Mavs were 8.5-point favorites that morning, and then beat the Spurs team, one of the at home, both games at home. The Spurs team, one of the worst teams in the NBA. If they win those 2 games, take care of business, which they were heavily favored to do so. They just had to hope that Memphis could beat OKC in the season finale on Sunday. Was it likely? Probably not, because Memphis was going to sit its starters. Most likely. Obviously, the Mavs didn't know it at the time. Maybe they want to get a fresh rep. Even that being the case, there's no guarantee that OKC is going to chase, heartily that final 10 seed because they've sat SGA in games previously. Neither here nor there. Again, the Mavs threw in the towel, quit on the season when they were mathematically still alive for the postseason. This wasn't a team in January deciding to trade a fringe 34-year-old good player and letting their their top 8 pick get additional minutes. This was 3 days prior to the end of the season, saying, thumbing, and in my opinion, thumbing their nose at the league. Keep in mind, this is a team, and this is not your typical 8 seed. This isn't the Jazz, whom it would be a cool story if they got in the playoffs and then got destroyed by Denver. This is a team featuring the second leading scorer in the NBA, Luka Doncic, one of the most talented and remarkable players on the planet, and Kyrie Irving, a Hall of Famer in his prime, whom they had just traded a first-round pick and 2 other starters for like 6 weeks prior to this decision. Again, I think Cuban was upset about the ruling. I think he was upset about the officiating when they didn't get that game. They didn't get that game overturned when they protested it. I think it was for a host of reasons. And he decided to basically thumb his nose at the NBA and Adam Silver and say, "I dare you to do something," because that, in my opinion, that's what it was. He's daring the league to react and because Silver has gone on record. If you do something intentionally to lose games and games aren't on the record, justice will be swift, etc. So he's put the league in a difficult spot, and I think the league wants to come down. And just wrapping up here, as I circle back to the beginning, I think stripping them of a first-round pick would be a monstrous decision, and just handing it to the Knicks, that complicates a whole host of other issues. So then you're benefiting another team. I think they would just, if anything, they would strip the pick, and then the Knicks would get the protections roll over, etc. But again, I don't even think that'll happen. I think it'll be a hefty fine, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, maybe a second rounder. So they'll make as big a statement and a grand as statement as possible without actually impacting the encore product of Dallas, would be my suspicion.
I tell you what, this is going to be very interesting. This is one of those moments where I wonder what would David Stern do, because we've heard the kind of sometimes legendary or infamous stories of how David Stern put the fear in man when he thinks that the league is being compromised in any way. And I agree with a lot of your sentiments. This was horrendous that this happened. I mean, this was so egregious because, like you said, tanking happens in the NBA. I personally don't even have as much an issue with a lot of tanking that does go on in the NBA.
Agreed. I think you can make an argument often that it makes sense.
It makes sense, and then I think you can make a case also that like most of the time it doesn't hurt the league as much as maybe people think. When the Pistons are playing, they're a terrible team. When they're playing, they're 3-4 big men at the same time. Nobody's watching them anyway. Like it doesn't matter.
Totally. And my thing about tanking, the reason I don't have a problem with it is I think every franchise, the goal of every sports franchise should be to win a championship. And sometimes it may benefit you to lose a game. It may put you closer to winning a championship if you lose a game or a couple games, because you're giving your young guys younger experience who may help you win a championship down the line, or you're putting yourself, instead of having the second worst record in the league, instead of being 13-49, you're 12-50, and that puts you in a better position to get a guy like Wembanyama. But again, if the goal is to win a championship, the Mavs were on the precipice of getting into the dance and giving themselves a chance to win a championship. And
that's where the problem is.
This is as open as the Western Conference has ever been in the last decade, and they didn't give themselves a chance to do that.
Yeah, that's where the problem is, that the Mavs mess with the integrity of the playoffs and the play-in with how they operated this. Those teams that were never going to make the playoffs and they want to tank, they want to play guys in the G League. Hit my light here. Like they could do all that. I don't think that really matters. I don't think anybody really cares about that. But a team that's actually in playoff contention, deciding, oh no, we're gonna pull ourselves out at the last minute. Like we saw the Blazers, they had been in playoff contention, but they pulled the damn little weeks ago. Like, so they never got to a point where we could say, oh, what's going on? Like, to pull at the last minute and do this is a problem. And I think that if David Stern was around, I think that there would be a very swift penalty. I mean, the first thing I thought about was what happened with Joe Smith and the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he maybe was too harsh on the Minnesota Timberwolves. He took 5 first-round picks away from the Minnesota Timberwolves for that ordeal with Joe Smith, which, if you don't know, you can look it up. They essentially signed Joe Smith to a bunch of one-year deals so that they could sign him to a longer-term deal that they already had agreed to, and it was circumventing the cap and how they did it. and David Stern dropped the hammer. I feel like if David Stern was the commissioner today and this happened, I think he would drop the hammer. I have not seen Adam Silver be that aggressive, at least not since the Donald Sterling situation. So I don't anticipate he'll be that aggressive. But I do think that voiding the pick would be the right thing to do. That's what I would do. I would say, I know the Heat, I think the Sixers last year and this year, they had second round picks just voided because of what happened with Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker this year. So like the 57th pick, I think, of the second round this year for the Sixers, like it's just nothing. There's no pick there. Like that's essentially what I would do for this lottery pick. I'd say, okay, you are removed from the lottery. Well, we just put you at 10, which is where your spot would have been, but the 10th pick just won't exist. You just lost your pick. That I think is the only way to really, solve this, because you can't have this. Like this is something that you can't allow this to be a precedent of teams to say, okay, we can play it up until the last day or so of the season and decide, you know what, we're gonna pull ourselves out and decide that we're gonna do this, because this was so like kind of unprecedented because of also the circumstances. Like most of the time, a team, you make the lottery, you make the playoffs, you make the lottery, you don't between the 14th to 15th pick. That 14th pick like never has a chance to be number one pick or top four. So a lot of times it's no different. So there's really no impetus to tank your way into the lottery when you're that close to the playoffs. That's why I think the NBA thought the playing situation would solve all this.
Yes,
but because of the whole protection situation,
yes, it was a perfect
that made this thing a lot more interesting. I kind of wonder, the CBA's already ratified, but if this, I don't know if that's why it's important they do something, because if they don't do something and this becomes a trend, this I think will be something that we talked about 7 years from now, saying, hey, they have to maybe adjust what lottery protections you can actually put on draft picks and trades, because otherwise this is something that could happen in the future.
That's where again, I don't think it's a precursor to what's going to happen in the future, because
so
it was a perfect storm. Any team that's close to a play-in game wants to make the play-in game. The players want to make the play-in. The coaches
the Thunder, in theory, like they're a team that could use a lottery pick, but like they're trying to make the play-in because that's extra money, that's great experience. Like
exactly,
it works.
The benefit of experience. You got if you win that game and get in the playoffs, and you have two. That's another home game. If you get in the playoffs, you have at least two more home games. That's hundreds of $1 million, tens of millions of dollars in the owner's pocket. He's gonna push for like there's no tomorrow. Cuban is it's the perfect storm of. Not only are they on the outside, they'd have to win their last two games and they needed help from the Grizzlies, but the protections is what made it so incredible. In other words, if the Mavs had their pick, whether it was 10, 9, 8, 11, 13, they don't even think about it. They try to get in the play-in tournament and see what happens, because even if they get in the play-in tournament and win the championship, it's not greatly impacted. So that's the thing. This is what I will say lastly. Why I'm voiding the pick is a major penalty, and you heard it how egregious I thought this was. Cuban's argument is going to be, that's cool, take my pick, but if you don't take the Pacers pick and you don't take the Pistons pick and you don't take the Jazz pick, then I'm going to burn.
I think he'll sue. Down. I think it would be a lawsuit. I think he would sue the NBA
100%, because in theory the Jazz technically did the same thing 2 nights prior. They sat Lauri Markkanen and most of their good players when they were still technically alive for the play-in. You and I both know that even if the Jazz get in the playoff tournament, they're almost definitely going to lose one of the first 2 games and not even make the playoffs. But basketball fans know that the Mavs have a far greater chance of, if they get into the dance, they're far more dangerous than a Jazz team, with Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton and company. A good team, but they're, it'd be shocking if they won a couple games.
But I think the one difference though would be that Jason Kidd said in these press conferences, we are tanking. Basically.
If I'm Mark, 100% agree. If I'm Mark Cuban, I am furious. If I care, I think he's almost picking a fight, so he let Kid ramble on. If I was an attorney and that was my client, in other words, if I was guilty of some wrongdoing and a client speaking on the face of the company, it's like if a company got sued for sexual harassment or something, and the CEO saying, "Listen, come on, girls got to stop worrying about this."
Yeah, boys would be boys, or something like that. Right?
Exactly. He didn't understand the implications and the word and the way that language can be parsed if it comes to a lawsuit. Everything he said was really was not what you want to hear, from from the guy speaking for the franchise. So all that's up. And then but I'll just say this: the long-term implications There's certainly a scenario which exists where this really backfires on Cuban, basically trying to show up the league, because depending on how Luka Doncic reacts to this situation, he said he wasn't happy. Listen, would anybody be stunned if a year from now he demands it? There was an ESPN article about it. This stuff starts leaking out. Anytime you quit, you force your team to quit when they still have a chance to make the playoffs. Again, 48 hours before the end of the season. That sets we talk about culture and say what you want about Tibbs. Tibbs would rather quit than give up a chance to go into than win a game to get into a play-in tournament. There's a lot of things that this will have ripple effects. It'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Adam Silver, all eyes are on you, and a lot of those eyes are in New York City. A lot of people want to know if this could benefit the Knicks in any way. So we'll be in.